Welcome to Courageous and Free. We are so excited to have you back for part 2 of our conversation with Alan Wilkett and Savannah Parvu. You want to stay tuned. Welcome back to Courageous and Free. And if you didn't see part 1 to our conversation, you got to go back and watch it because we are continuing on with what you can do to be a part of healing and helping with human trafficking. I know so many of you saw Sound of Freedom and you're all upset and you're angry and you're like, what can I do to make a difference? Well, we say, don't get just angry, come make a difference. And so we want to continue this conversation on. And I love what Savannah has to say about Sound of Freedom. This is so powerful, Savannah. So the girl starts out singing and she ends singing. And what do you have to say about that?
That it doesn't work that way. Like it would take years for a survivor who had gone through something like that to go back to singing and being herself again. Like it doesn't happen overnight, and I feel like that movie poorly portrays the trauma that was done.
Yeah, and I think what do you think about that? About
Well, as somebody who, as I'm sure Savannah did as well, was asked to sit on panels after Sound of Freedom was shown to talk about it because it does have a profound effect on the
you
audience
bet.
because the audience sees that and says there's an injustice there, and there is.
Sure.
And so all of that, I think, has some positives to it to bring awareness, to bring a sense of injustice, and let's turn the table on that. I think the main thing is, as Savannah said, is there's some things that were poorly portrayed, and the other thing I think is critical to understand about a movie like Sound of Freedom in particular is that it kind of portrays what's happening somewhere else. It doesn't accurately reflect what's happening here. And as somebody who has worked in this space for many years in the law enforcement world, our recoveries they don't look like that. It's a different, and we can talk about what that really looks like, but I think it's important just to put it in context that there's a value to the awareness and to the emotion that but it doesn't necessarily happen that way here in the United States. And I think it's important to note that.
Well, and I will say that, we took other survivors with us to see, and they actually left so frustrated at that movie. Not that we're not grateful for the
Sure.
movie. We're all grateful. But I think that it portrayed it of not that everybody is taken, so everybody walks in fear, and that's not how it's really happening here in America. I'd love for you guys to really take a little bit, what are the misconceptions of how human trafficking is happening here in America?
So I'll jump into a couple of them and then
Feel free to
pass it over to Savannah. A couple of things that I'll say are big misconceptions is that human trafficking is happening somewhere else. It's important to know that human trafficking is happening in all of our cities and all of our communities. It is happening in our neighborhoods. It's local. It's not foreign. It's local. It is a foreign issue, but it is a local issue for us. And so I think that's number one. I think number two is, how does this happen? You know, I tell parents oftentimes we are really good at talking about stranger danger, walk together in groups, doing that protection from a physical standpoint, and we should put great emphasis on protecting our kids physically. But the truth is, on human trafficking here in the United States, is the vast majority, and I'm talking over 90% of the trafficking that happens here in the United States, the victim is being lured in, not snatched in. So we oftentimes say, well, this white van pulls up in the Walmart parking lot, snatches somebody off. Does it happen? Yes, it does happen. But that's 3 to 5%. The rest of that is being lured in. It's the older male or the older female or the peer who is luring them in with promises of gifts and love and romance and trying to fill a void that so many kids have in their lives. And so they're reaching. So the myth is it's not just the white van pulling into the parking lot of Walmart, it's the luring in. And so my point is we need to take just as much care and concern on the physical side of our kids, on the emotional vulnerability side of our kids, and making sure those gaps are filled in as well. The other thing I would mention as a myth is, where is this happening at?
Right.
So many people think it's still street tracks and blades, and we still have our street tracks and blades and pins and pushes and all those kind of things that happen out in the physical world. But statistically, trafficking and those 4 stages of trafficking, which is recruiting, grooming, trafficking, and immersion, those 4 stages are now being accomplished online. So it's a digital world that's providing the lure to our kids now.
Give an
as opposed.
example of this, because this is so good what you're talking about.
So statistically, 60%
Uh-huh.
of all trafficking is happening online. We're starting to see that number break a little bit. And now we're starting to see that number creep up towards 70 and 72%
Whoa.
of all trafficking is happening online. Everything is moving into that digital space. The gateways, the pathways into that digital world are going to be your social media, which come in 3 stages. That's synchronous, asynchronous, and no synchronous. So you have social media, you have apps, which are huge parts of the recruiting process. So apps are part of that, and gaming systems. And most people don't think about gaming systems, but my own son, there was an attempt to recruit him on an Xbox One, and he was in the house of a cop with a cruiser sitting in the driveway, thinking nobody's going to mess with this house. But I heard an FBI agent say it the other day when I was on stage with him, and I'm kind of ripping this off from him, is that he made a statement that I think is so important to just embed here. He said the most dangerous place for a child to be in America today is alone in their bedroom with a digital device. Because now we're inviting predators and we're inviting through the digital space. And so it's important that we understand the myth is not just happening at a mall or happening at a playground, although we need to protect ourselves there.
Right.
But that physical space is very small compared to this digital space that's consuming our kids at a rapid rate.
And you know what? People don't, that one's really hard for people. I mean, when you tell people that they're letting their kids walk around with these telephones and these devices, and you said something the other day, and I don't know if you can repeat it, that we are welcoming the world. What is your statement? Because I don't want to snatch that wrong.
Yeah. So the key, I think, is that when we put a digital device in the hands of our kids, especially if that digital device is left unprotected, we are inviting the world into the palm of their hand.
Yep. Yes, we are. And you know, that's what I really want parents to understand, because I know they're sitting there going, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, I'm on Facebook and I'm 50-some-year-old woman. And I've had 4 men try to reach out to me. I mean, we'll get calls at night. My husband will be like, who is calling you? And I'm like, we tried to get my number off. People don't realize it is right there. I mean, it is open. And then when I start talking about that, I had a 13-year-old little girl say, yeah, well, I've had men trying to contact me, but I can't tell my mom or she'll take my device away from me. And I'm like, what are we doing, parents? We need to be aware that this stuff is happening, and our kids are so afraid of losing it that they're not talking with us. And we've got to begin that conversation.
Well, think about this. In our houses, we put doors and door locks and cameras and ring devices, everything to try to keep the world outside of our house, and then carry in our pocket the biggest door you could possibly create, which in a 6.7-inch device we call an iPhone. And the entire world can slip through that and into the minds and souls of our kids.
And I tell you, just to put something out there is, I mean, I just got a call 2 weeks ago from a family that the father so torn up because a guy named, I'm not going to give the name, had 6 12-year-olds grooming them off of the phone, sending them sex tapes, sending them, he didn't know, he finally caught it. And that's what parents don't understand. I mean, really, I mean, it's not popular. But I mean, people think we're crazy. Our kids do not have social media. And people are like, how are your kids? They're popular. Our kids, but we don't want them to seek the approval of man, Alan. You know, we've got to teach our kids that that's not what we're not looking for how many likes we get. And I want to have this conversation because I know somebody's out there going, how can I take this away from my children? Well, then what are you going to do to really protect them? So give us some more. How do we protect them if they're not going to take it away from them? We understand. Well, what can they do?
So, well, first of all, the first thing I would say, and this is old-fashioned as it can be, and so it's going to reflect my age. But parents need to be parents first, not best friends with their kids. You were designed by God to be the guardrails on your kids' lives. to make sure they don't go over the cliff.
Right.
And whatever that guardrail needs to look like, that's what you need to be in their lives. If you choose to give them a digital device, and I understand it's the world we're entering into, and to say we're gonna do away with all digital devices and we're gonna do away with all this is folly,
Right,
because
right.
it's here.
Uh-huh.
We've let the cat out of the cage.
Mm-hmm.
The beast is unleashed, and so there is no bringing it back in the cage. But what do we do then? There are, and I call them parental surveillance devices. And it sounds ominous, but there are certain types of software that parents can put on their kids' devices that will enable them to be able to see what's coming at their kids. Things like Protect Young Eyes or Bark. Bark, I happen to think, is probably one of the best ones out there. It's a parental surveillance device. You put it on your kids' iPad or their phone or their Google device, and it enables you to see exactly what's being downloaded. You have to give the permission for that to happen. And not only that, but it gives you a report of what they've done during that week or month or day, depending on how you set it up. And you get a report that says, my kid's device has had this many attempts to try to break through. They've been on this much time on this particular app. If they try to bring in an app that is disguised, like the calculator app, that's really a vault app, if it comes in, you as the parent through this system will know. The other thing that you'll know is you'll know what apps are out there that are being used the most to create the greatest harm to kids. They will create the top 5 suicidal ideation apps. They will create the ones the top 5 that are body image or body shaming apps. They will tell you when a new app hits that is a nudifying app that can take your child's picture and literally strip them digitally and put their naked body out on the internet. So now you have a picture of your child who becomes horrified, even though they did nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have to face their peers who said, I saw you naked online. It will give you that type of report and that kind of detail. If we're going to allow them to have this, we've got to put the guardrails, because you were designed by God to be their guardrail. Without you, they have none. And I will tell you, a child left to their own is no match to the depth of predators that are seeking to bring them down.
Phew, that's powerful. Well, and one other thing, I think people who are watching today, that is such good stuff. I want to do more on this, because I know you're loving it out there too. Is what can we do legislation wise? Because I had a great conversation with John Richmond the other week, and I'm tell you what, he shook me up inside, because he's like, Carolyn, he said, if we could just get our cities and our community putting more money into our sheriffs and into our police departments and into, he says, we could be catching probably another 100,000 victims. He says, that's what he told me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. He said, but the challenge is once we get them, where are we putting them?
Agreed. Savannah, you work on some legislation, and we both do. We work. What's some of the priorities that we've looked at as legislative?
Well, we've tried to change the hotel law for survivors to be able to sue hotels that have allowed human trafficking to happen in their establishments. And then we've also tried to do the Default to Safety Act for cell phones, where they come automatically set to, is it
Safety filters turned on.
with the safety
Oh, they
filters
come
turned on?
automatic like that?
From the factory.
Yeah.
And how's that going? Okay, so let's talk about, no, and that's why I want to talk about, because, I know that, how many times have you went up about the hotels? I mean, I think it's 4 times, right? That you've been up.
No, so we've been going since 2018.
Okay, and just so you all understand, that means that what they're doing is they're going to legislation saying if a hotel knows that there is human trafficking happening and they do not report it, that they are held responsible. Seems simple to me, doesn't it to you? And what keeps happening every time you take that? What happens?
Well, they always find loopholes, obviously, even though we passed some, which I think were some well-intended legislation that both of us supported. There's always the loophole, and then there's the enforcement piece. You can have all the laws in the world, but they're not being enforced.
Okay.
Then you have another loophole. One of the other things that I think we're both passionate about is we believe that the buyer, which drives demand into the market, and the buyer who inflicts enormous trauma on the victim, we believe they should be held accountable. And our idea is, instead of buying, now we're talking about adults now, but being able to buy a human being in the state of Florida and do whatever you want to for 30 or minutes to an hour under the contract of prostitution, you're able to buy that human being, get charged if you're caught, get charged with a misdemeanor, is a shame.
Absolutely.
And so that should be at least a felony. Our goal is that the trafficker, who is the distributor, if you're looking at it from a marketer standpoint, the facilitator of that trafficking act, that you should have the buyer, who's the demand side of that, who's creating the whole market in the first place, should be held equally culpable for the trauma being inflicted on that victim as the trafficker is. So if the trafficker is going to get a third-degree felony, a second-degree felony, then the buyer should as well. And so these are things that has to happen.
And you know that if all of a sudden, because I mean, we've got a man around here, Grady Judd, man, he just goes after him, doesn't he? And I mean, when he is plastering their faces up on, it's shame. Who is the average buyer? What do we know that they look like?
Well, we know buying goes across the entire spectrum. So every ethnicity, every gender, they're buying. But if you boil it down to according to studies, the most common demographic of a buyer, again, every demographic, but the most common demographic is a middle to late 40s white male who makes over $100,000 a year and is in positions of power and influence. And I have said this over and over, that may be why we can't get serious legislation on reducing demand, is because those who are in positions of power and influence just might be, not all, but there may be sprinkled in there a few buyers.
Right. And the problem is if we could make it where, I mean, let's just face it, if they are a lawyer, if they are a coach of a school, and instead of just getting a slap and just getting sent home and it's hushed, if we can make it where it's put out, where there's some shame and guilt that comes along with it, it might just make them not want to just do that quite so much.
And it's a little harder to plea out a felony than it is a misdemeanor. So I think that's one piece. And the other piece is, and I think probably some of the latest, so the legislatures are pretty serious about this, and I'm thankful.
Good.
They want to do a real buyer beware type legislative effort for Florida. And including in that, since we know we're dealing with that demographic, now we're going to start looking at asset forfeiture and forfeiting property and things of that nature. It may make it a little more stinging to a person who has accumulated that type of stature in the community if they actually are going to lose real property. And if you're buying another human being, then in my view, you should pay a price.
Amen.
Because you're not just buying a body, you're buying a human being who's been created in the image of God. How can you buy God? And the answer is you can't. We need to recognize that.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Goad-Pankella, and I am really excited to be a part of this message that we are going to be bringing to you today. It's about education, awareness, what we can do, and how we are going to make a difference. And my slogan is, it's not okay. And we are going to be a voice to the voiceless. So come take this journey with us.
So I've been in law enforcement for over 25 years. I spent the last 13 years or so of my career fighting human trafficking because my goal was to end this atrocity. 90 to 95% of kids coming into sex trafficking are being lured in. They're being lured in by recruiting and grooming.
And so one day when I was leaving out of the gas station, that is where I locked eyes with my first trafficker. And it only took him 3 words to realize that I was his perfect victim before he started grooming me. And those 3 words was, "You are beautiful." Those are 3 words that I had never heard my entire life from people that were supposed to love you and support you and be there for you.
The grooming stage is where they're slowly being conditioned
for the life that they're about to get into.
But over the next 3 weeks, he would then groom me and kind of find out everything about me. And I wish I knew all this then, but I didn't. But that's when he started to learn my family history, my background, where I came from, who loves me, who supports me.
So one of the fastest growing aspects of minor sex trafficking, or sex trafficking of minors, is what we refer to as familial trafficking. That's kids being trafficked by their own families.
Both of my parents were drug addicts and alcoholics. So my dad had a stroke when I was 9, then that left him disabled. And after that, my mom got involved with more drugs. She started doing crack. Eventually, she started prostituting herself for her drugs. And I went with her one time when I was 11, and her drug dealer offered her a $10 piece of crack for me instead of for her.
After about 3 weeks of grooming me, he asked me, did I want to go on vacation with him? And off we went to where I thought was going to be the vacation of my dreams was actually the nightmare from hell. Every thought in my mind is going off, but he reminded me with the truth. And the truth was, don't think about running because no one is going to look for you, no one cares about you, no one will even know that you're dead.
My trafficker would take me to a hotel. He would make arrangements with the staff so that he wouldn't have to stay. The staff would let people in the rooms. And I remember one time I had been there for a couple of days. The staff came in one day and they told me that my friend called, which was my trafficker, and said that I needed to walk home, which was a couple miles away. And I remember I was walking down the hall barefoot, bleeding, crying, and nobody asked any questions. If I was okay, if I needed help, they just let me walk by and leave.
We're talking about little human beings that dream of being firemen and police officers and astronauts who find themselves in the back room of a brothel.
And so you're probably all wondering, okay, well, how did you get here? How did you get here? The time when I finally got that courage again, right, to walk into that church completely broken. I remember sitting there like this, and they were in a DNA series, and they were talking about God's DNA, love, acceptance, mercy, grace, being adopted into a family, right? All these things that we know about God's love, but however, I never knew them. I just remember sitting there weeping with my face in my hands, like I've been looking for this my whole life.
The ILO says that right now, while we're sitting here, there are 40.3 million victims of human trafficking in the world today. The only way to combat it is for every individual to become angry enough to realize that to stop this, I must be engaged.
We've got to be a part. We're asking you to join this fight with us. Alone, we can do so little, but together, we can do so much.
They need a place where they can come and just find that healing. A place where they can recover their voice. They can recover their dream. They can recover their hope. And they can recover what it truly means to be created in the image of God. So we need safe homes.
And I get chills just even saying it to you because I see the difference that it makes to pull these girls out of the situations they're in. And guys, it's not rocket science what we're gonna do. We're gonna just love them. We're gonna tell them they're worthy when they feel unworthy. We're gonna hold them when they cry. We're gonna listen to them share their traumas, but then we're gonna celebrate with them as they get their victories. People say it's a $150 billion business, Carolyn. How are we ever gonna stop it? Listen, one person at a time. They're born one at a time, they die one at a time, so we reach them one at a time.
You be the voice for the voiceless. You be the hope for the hopeless. And you be the love for those who have not experienced love in a long time.
We can't give up. We can't stop. But we need your help today to make a difference in one girl's life. share a story when we do our events together that is just so powerful about the one girl that you rescued? And she'd been branded, and people, I know you're watching that, and they can't believe. You mean they're actually branded? Yeah, they're branded. That's part of. I mean, maybe you can share a little bit about that, and then share the story. Why do they brand?
Well, brand shows ownership. It's like branding cattle.
Yeah.
It's putting a price tag on them. It basically is saying you belong to me. And so they'll brand usually their street name or a symbol that reflects their street name. The one that I've talked about before that was in the domestic violence shelter, when I asked her about her brand, she lifted up her hair and she had a barcode on the back of her neck, just like you'd find at Walmart. She said, I'm worth $25. And she began to weep at that kitchen table. And it still breaks my heart today to remember her putting her head on that kitchen table in a domestic violence shelter in a kitchen and just weeping because I'm only worth $25 when we know that she's fearfully and wonderfully made. How can we reduce a human being to that dollar amount? If they have a tattoo and it has the number 16 or the number 304, those are the two numbers of trafficking, because P is the 16th letter of the alphabet, means I'm being pimped. 304 is upside down for hoe. And so they will actually brand them with those numbers inside there. But what we're seeing is a movement away from the hard branding, which is the tattoo, because law enforcement's getting better at recognizing that and are starting to do soft branding or even social media branding. So branding has not went away. Branding has just simply moved into other spaces that still show that sense of ownership, where one human being thinks that they can enslave another and stamp them with their symbol of ownership. And that's what a brand is.
And the one girl, finished that story out, that when she lifted her, she said, will you tell me how much that I'm worth?
Yeah. And so that was a different girl that was actually in one of our strip clubs. And so that particular girl began to weep because her statement was, nobody sees me. She wanted to know why I, a law enforcement, a cop, was actually talking to her as a human being. And she said, why are you talking to me? Nobody sees me. And they feel like that they have just been labeled by society: prostitute, whore, slut, tweaker, all these labels that society has put over them. They don't even see themselves anymore as human. They just see themselves as a reflection of what they used to be or what they've done.
Right.
And so to know that they are not what they've done, but they are who they are because they were created in the image of their creator, brings that value of, I'm a human being created in the image of God. I am not the sum total of the things that have happened to me. I'm the sum total of what I've been created to be.
I tell you what, I cry every time you tell the story, because when you said that you lifted it up and you scanned her, she said, just scan and tell me what I was worth. And I think she said you scanned, it was like $25. And she just began to weep. And, I feel so much for her, because, there's so many women and men that are out there that, it's sad. Even in the midst of her abuse, she wanted to be worth something in the midst of her abuse. I mean, that's broken. Do you know what I mean? And for you to look at her and tell her you're $25, and her to begin to weep, but you were able to look at her and say, no, you are priceless.
Priceless.
And that is the message that we are taking, and you are taking, is you are priceless. Your value is far above rubies and gold. So I know there's people that are listening. We're coming to an end, but just tell us what can they do? They're sitting there going, I want to be a part. Tell me what I can do. How can they get involved in their community? What can they do in legislation to be a part of what you guys are trying to get done? What can we do? Put us to work.
I think the biggest thing is talking about it and talking to the people who can make a difference and make changes with legislature.
Yeah, I think educating yourself, raising awareness. Every person is connected to other people. We all have these 7 degrees of connection. Find those connections, use those connections to bring awareness and education. And then, of course, I say the ultimate is training. What do I mean by training? So that I know what to do if I see it. Mm-hmm. I'm not just aware of it, but I have the numbers to call. I have the Florida hotline. I have local hotlines and local resources that I'm able to reach out to do that. I think the other thing is find a reputable organization that's in the fight already. And they're in that fight, they're doing the work, join them. Either as a volunteer, financially get connected with them. There are great organizations, Courageous and Free being one of those. And we're sitting here today in the middle of seeing some really great things happen through the ministry that you guys have put up to bring housing and hope. And I'd say it's not just housing, it's housing and hope. And hope is
Amen.
probably the bigger thing than the housing is,
Amen.
although they
That's
need
right.
the housing.
Yeah.
So the point being is find that reputable organization, get connected. There's a lot of work to be done. And it doesn't require everybody doing a lot. It just requires all of us doing what we can. And if we all do what we can, you'll fill in the missing piece that makes the dream happen. And somebody's dream will get fulfilled. Oftentimes, trafficking is really just an off-ramp. It's somebody who's got a destiny. They've got a dream. God put in them a created purpose. Trafficking takes them off their purpose. But what we're trying to do is give them an on-ramp back to their purpose.
I love
And so that
too.
on-ramp back to their purpose is something that everyone can be a part of.
Well, I'm going to tell you, and it's working. I'm going to tell you, people, a little bit of hope goes a long way. You know, it's when they see Savannah and they hear her and they hear that hope of, man, you mean you've really been through all of that and you found healing, you found restoration, you found hope, and look what you're doing. I mean, if you would watch her work, man, she has got that place ripping and roaring and living life to its purpose. There is life and hope after that much. I call it almost a triumph after tragedy, you know?
Yeah.
And it's powerful. So tell us how they can get a hold of you guys, Alan.
Not that you'd want to, but if you chose to, it's warrior321.com. So warrior321.com or Alan, ALAN, at warrior321.com is a way to get a hold of me.
What about you, Savannah?
You can reach me on my website, which is savannahparvu.com.
And that's Savannah, like Georgia, right? We're going to put it up on the screen so you guys will be able to see it. And thank you all for just sticking this out with us and being able to endure this uncomfortable conversation. I know it's hard to listen to, but it is necessary because we cannot stay silent. We've got to get our voices out there. And we're going to tell you, we do a lot of events together. And I'm telling you, I'm honored anytime I get to stand on a stage with any of these people because they are the real deal. They're in the middle of the fight. And I will tell you, I say this humbly, it is probably one of the greatest, it's incredible. The event is just really incredible. It has got so much information, so much heart, and so much hope. And so if you would like to bring this team into your area, we would be honored to come. And, you know, it's to your church, to your Rotary clubs, to your women's events, to your schools, even to your youth groups. I have to be honest with you. We need to be everywhere with this message. And once again, we keep saying we can rescue these girls, but what are we rescuing them to? And that's where Courageous and Free wants to come in. And we want to create a whole restoration facility that is just a place where they can find hope, find a purpose, find their identity. We had 33 girls that were baptized last year because they found hope in Christ. And I'm going to tell you all right now, there's nothing that we can offer that can give them that hope. It has to come from Christ to get that true healing. So we need your help today to do that. But you can make a difference. Alone, we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So come join our fight and let your voice be heard. God bless you.